Hello everyone, my name is Konopka with Raize Software, and in this session I'm going to be discussing CodeSite strategies and techniques. To get started, though, I do want to provide a quick overview for those of you who aren't familiar with the CodeSite logging system. This will be a quick review if you are familiar with the tool and you've had an opportunity to use it. The rest of the session, though, is really going to be focusing on some of the different techniques that we use internally when we use CodeSite for other consulting projects and other things that we've done. Also, various insights that we've seen from our customers and how they use the tool, and there's certain features that have been added over the years because developers want to take things in a little different direction, ease maintenance, manage data better. So hopefully we'll have all kinds of rich information that we can extract out of the next half hour or so. We're going to be looking specifically at managing multiple loggers and what benefits we get from that. We want to take a look at how to manage our log files better because we can get a lot of data when we're generating information with CodeSite, and so ways in which we can manage that can be very helpful. We'll take a closer look at the CodeSite Manager, an object that's part of the CodeSite logging system that you may not be that familiar with, but it has some real value in what it brings to the table. We'll take a quick look at managing multiple views. Some extra techniques you may not be familiar with if you haven't come across them yet. And then we're going to wrap up the session with a fun little tool demonstrating a couple different things. One, extending the CodeSite logging system, but also taking advantage of a technique called class helpers inside of Delphi. And the really cool thing is that we can actually add new logging functionality into the existing CodeSite logger class without having to create a descendant or change things, and it actually is very cool. So very quickly, our CodeSite logging system is exactly that. It's an advanced debugging and logging system. Gives developers deeper insight into how their code is executing. And so for those of you who are familiar with the tool, it does help you locate problems more quickly, ensure your application's running correctly. It's a great diagnostic tool. It can be used during development, testing, all the way to deployment. Is one of the key features of it. We want to be able to get this rich logging information when we deploy our system, so covers a whole range of features. Some of the highlighted ones are that rather than a single function that will generate a log message for you where you have to format it, convert it, we use logging classes that provide many different types of methods to capture all kinds of information in your code. One of the other nice things about having this logging capability, other than say showing a message box or manipulating the user interface, is that you're not interrupting the application flow. And so that can be crucial if you're doing things that are thread-based. If you have communication between a foreground and a background thread and you want to find out what's going on. Clients and server communication, making calls to a REST server and you're getting results back. Seeing the interactions. We don't want to disrupt that by displaying some message box or stopping at a breakpoint to be able to see what's going on. What's really powerful about CodeSite's logging capabilities is we can log very complex data structures very easily. Single line statements capture all that data. We also provide a lot of flexibility in grouping or categorizing your logging messages. So rather than impose an arbitrary logging level mechanism, we give you the ability to create your own user-defined categories. And we're going to see an example of that very quickly, of how important it is to really adopt this idea of multiple categories and what benefit that plays when you're doing your analysis. Powerful and flexible configuration, and probably most important, I think what most developers really appreciate, is that there's specialized tools dedicated to help analyze the information you get back from CodeSite. So rather than just dump it to a text file and try to extract information out of it, there's tools that know the CodeSite log format, they know the types of data that it's looking for, and can help you locate problem areas more quickly. every instance of RAD-Studio includes a copy of CodeSite Express, which provides a fully functional version. It provides the core logging functionality, which gives you live logging at the local level as well as file-based logging. Remote capabilities are upgraded to the Studio Edition, and you have all your standard data types supported in the Express version. The Studio version, as you would suggest, it includes a lot more capabilities, and so many more data types, collection support, XML files. You have a lot of helpful functions like getting the current memory status or system information, doing image support, so sending out screenshots or bitmaps and those types of things. Custom data support, so if you have a data structure that's very custom, there's no RTTI on it, you can still get that information to CodeSite. In addition, remote logging capabilities, so you can have your messages go from one machine to another, logged remotely and a file on that other machine. File logging by date with a high precision timer, so you can get great timing informations. You can compress your messages in the log files. Also have the ability to hook into the sending process. So as your application generates a CodeSite message, you can hook into it and do something with it. Perhaps write it to a database or send an email notification that a particular type of error or type of message was generated. It really is flexible for what you need to do. Additional, methods to call the Windows event log. So you wouldn't use that as a destination, but you could use CodeSite to format your message and get it into the event log very easily. Scratchpad methods get transient data right inside the viewer, nice and helpful. So that's the quick overview. I've done enough CodeSite demos over the past several code rages, and you can certainly go back and get a more detailed walkthrough. But really my focus for today is to kind of take things a little bit deeper, talk about certain strategies and things that when we're using the tool, we can get some real benefit from. So the first one that I want to discuss is using multiple loggers and categories. And one of the reasons why we added this capability to the product is that most logging tools give you the ability to have different levels of logging, different verbosity levels. So you have one that's only the most important things will show up. Your next level has, okay, some critical things and all the really important stuff. And then you keep dropping it further and further down. And then at the lowest level, it's like everything just gets sent to the log. Well, the problem with that is that that's very hard to control the amount of data that you're generating. And so instead of having some arbitrary level, we recommend creating categories and have the categories represent whatever makes logically sense to your application. Now, maybe you might have a critical logger that you always have enabled. Always anything that's important that has to be logged, you're going to make sure you use critical to do it. And we recommend setting a category on it and a category color even, so that they show up different inside of the viewer. We can also filter on those categories and do some analysis that way. The other benefit is that independent loggers can be enabled and disabled on their own. So if you're not interested in a particular category, maybe you have one that's on message transport that is used between your different clients and servers, and any TCP communication, you may have a logger that's dedicated for monitoring that. If you have a TCP connection problem that you're trying to debug, sure, enable those loggers and get the additional info. Normal operations, probably not a big deal. You can turn those off. So what is this? As an example of this, I've got my little generator program here, and one of the examples illustrates this point precisely, and that is that I've created two different loggers. I've got the regular CodeSite logger that is always there to send things, but I've also have a calculator logger and an expression logger. The calculator is use to drive all of the button clicks and anything that I'm interested in the user interaction of the calculator. The message, the functionality of parsing the expression is all being captured from the expression logger. And so what example we see is if I start typing in an expression, I get the calculator messages showing up in my log, and I can then see clearly that those are the calculator messages. If I hit equal, I now have the expression logger that comes into play as well, and they're intertwined because they're both enabled. What's nice is if I know that my calculator is working correctly, I can disable that logger. Now, in practice, you may not have a checkbox in your application that does it, but you could certainly do it through a configuration file, an INI file, an XML file, through the registry. You could do it as part of an initial web service call, that as you're making a call, are you going to be doing logging? However you want to turn that on or off, you simply change the enabled property of the logger. What happens next is it just operates normally, but I'm not getting any of the calculator messages because I've disabled that logger. Now I'll get the expression messages because I didn't disable that particular one. So again, really powerful ways to manage your different sections of code. And so what's nice is, you get in your testing, you might turn all of your loggers on, you deploy it, and the initial configuration for that might just be 1 or 2 loggers that are turned on. The rest of them are turned off unless there's an actual problem you're trying to track down. So keep that in mind in establishing that. And again, the benefit of having these categories is I can go into and create a new view and select I want a category, and it'll tell me all the categories that are currently being used inside of this message list. And so it's very easy to create a new view based on just a single category. All right, let's move on to log file management. Again, we're talking about deployment. You could do it locally too, or in your development machine. But typically, when we're doing development or testing, we've got the live viewer there. We're monitoring the information. But when we deploy, we're almost always going to a log file. And if you've used CodeSite for anything substantial, you'll note that you can generate quite a bit of data. It gets very easy to just start sending stuff to CodeSite and capture it, and especially with lots of objects, it adds up. So one of the things that you need to be aware of are the additional parameters that are tied to the log file CodeSite destination. And when you set up a destination, the minimum pieces that you need are the first two, the file path and the file name. That tells the destination object, okay, where is the log file going to be located, and how do I name it? Now, the other parameters are optional, but they're very important. Max size especially. What max size does is it's the number of kilobytes that this log file will grow to, and when it reaches the next message that causes it to exceed the maximum size, a new log file will be created, and it will be appended with a suffix. And basically that new log file is a new part. And so you have the original, you have your starting log file, it exceeds the limit, max size gets reached, and a new part gets created, and the old one sticks around. And if that's all you did, you would keep building new parts up to whatever amount of space you allocated that you set for the max size. So maybe you set the max size to be 256, which would be 256K for each part of the log file. Now, we all realize we have limited disk space, and we may not just want the CodeSite log files keep adding 256K and just keep going on and on and on. Maybe we only are interested in the last 5 meg worth of data. And so in that case, we can trim down the amount of parts by setting a max parts value. So if we set it to 256 and we were to set the max parts to 20, that's going to give us our 5 meg of space. What happens when we get to the part 21? Well, the original, the oldest part would get deleted from the disk automatically. And so this allows you to kind of keep the most recent set of messages without filling and flooding your hard drive. Another interesting configuration option for the destinations is log by date and the log by date format. What this does is if you have a process that runs for a long time, you may be interested in breaking up the log file based on the day of operation. And so by setting log by date to true, the log file that gets generated will be appended with the current date in the format that is described by log by date format, which is year, month, day. One of the reasons why we set it up as the default is that forces the log file parts to be sorted based on the day. And so you can find the most recent one by going to the end, and it works out really well. So again, these are really useful things to manage your production level log files. All right, some CodeSite manager techniques. One of the things that you can often run into some issues with is if you have an application and you can run multiple instances of it, then it can be often confusing to know, well, which instance of messages am I looking at when I'm viewing my log, because the app name field in the log just shows you the current app. Let me pull up the viewer and I'll bring up that column, application name, and it just tells me that this is the CodeSite Message Generator VCL edition. And so, which is great, but if I were to run it again, I would still get the same app name. Well, it turns out that the app name is managed by the CodeSite manager, because there's only one of them per application, so it makes sense. Well, the app name property is editable inside of your code. And so if you have an app that you can run multiple instances for and you have an identifier tied to it, usually you would have some sort of ID to know that this is a separate instance, and maybe it's a port number if it's a server type thing. Whatever way you would distinguish it, you can set the CodeSite manager.app name to whatever you want it to be. Maybe take the original app name and put append a value at the end of it. What's nice about that is that value shows up in the messages, so that you can now filter on app name and to find only the one instance that's there. You may also want to take the process ID and append that. It's another option that people can do, which is great. Another nice way. But what's really effective is, especially as we do more and more multi-threaded development in our processing, we rerun our application and we get a brand new thread ID. Or later in our program we've got a thread gets reused, and so using thread IDs by themselves can be very cumbersome to try to analyze. One of the things we'll note is, I'll pull up the other columns, is we do have the full thread, the thread ID that's used. Not super effective, but it's there, which can help. What I'd like to show, I'm going to clear off my little view here, is there's the set current thread name. And what this does is it's a method of the CodeSite manager, and whenever you call it and you specify a name, it takes the calling thread ID and maps it to that name. And so as an example, what I've done is I have this threading demo that I've done, and each of the threads at the beginning of it I call CodeSite manager.set thread name. So for this particular thread, I'm calling it bubble sort, selection sort, and quick sort. The nice thing about it is that I'm going to see the thread show up with this new name. And so when I go ahead and run this, I can see that my threads all show me the actual name. I don't really care what numeric value that thread ID has. I just want to know that am I generating those messages from it. What's nice is that if I rerun the app, the quick sort will still be in the quick sort thread. And so this can be really useful, especially for you have dedicated processing threads that your application runs. You can set up a thread name and your logs will be able to key off of that. And one of the things that the next section I was going to describe, I'll just blend right into it now, is I have this data where I have a bunch of information that's logged in here. I've got 3 different threads, all kinds of swaps, everything's intermingled, and it's not really telling me a whole lot other than from start to finish, how long did it take. And really this is where these dedicated analysis tools come into play. If I look at my organize message button here, and there's 3 here. There's one that will automatically organize new messages that come in. And what that means is as a new message comes in, its criteria are evaluated, and if it's different from anything that we haven't seen previously, it'll create a new view based on those differences. So, for example, I'm not going to set up the automatic organizing. You can certainly do that, but this has the same criteria. I want to organize my messages based on the thread ID in which they took place, or the thread, since it's not really an ID, it's the name. By simply checking that and clicking OK, the viewer is going to partition out and create a new view based on the different threads that it finds in the list. So we can see that we have the bubble sort, the selection sort, and the quick sort. What's very nice is if you look down in the status bar, we can see how many messages this view has. So the bubble sort has over 3,100 out of the 4,300 messages. So those were, each one of those is a swap, not super efficient. Selection sort's better. It's about 1,000 out of the 43. The quick sort's the best at about 227 out of the 4,300. And so we can see not only breaking this down, but we can also jump to the end of the message, and we can select the 2. We can go back and forth, hold the shift key and do it. It selects the 2 messages, and it tells you how long it took those 2 statements to execute from beginning to end. So there's timing information based on all of the recording that we do. Now, one of the situations, and it won't be super obvious in here, in this example, but because I have multiple threads, I often want to find out, okay, a message took place, about halfway through the process over here. What was going on in my other thread at this same time? And the way to resolve that is on the toolbar, there's this synchronize selected message when switching views. So if I click that, my message icon changes, the message itself gets highlighted a little bit, and when I switch views, it will navigate me to the closest item, whether it's the same time or right before it, and so I can go back and forth and find the messages that match. So even though the bubble sort was, early in its process, the quick sort is almost done. And so that's a really powerful way to synchronize between multiple views inside your viewer. I hit both of those. We can just keep skipping over through the slides. And so one of the last things I wanted to show today was a little helper tool that we can use to basically add more capabilities to CodeSite on our own. CodeSite by itself, the logging classes capture all kinds of information. there's a whole lot of functionality built in with various data types and various information that can be extracted and sent. However, CodeSite doesn't handle everything, and certain things, as things change and get more popular, people want to be able to send data in a way that makes sense. And whether it's something generic like JSON, as this example does, or it's something very specific like a specific type of data structure that's being used in your particular application that doesn't have RTTI, it may be record-based, it may just be nested classes, and you want to show more of that relationship. CodeSite gives you the basic tools to allow you to do that. In this example, I'm creating a class helper to make it easier to send some JSON data over. And so let's take a look into XE5 and we'll take a closer look at what we're talking about. So I've got a simple application here, not a whole lot going on. It's a button, and the idea is if I loaded up some JSON from an application and I would send it, I could send it as a text file, or I could load it into a string data. Maybe I received it from a REST service call, and I would do my send and send it out to my log, which is going to be whatever format the JSON came in as. It may be one big long line, it may be carriage return line feed formatted, it may just have line feeds in it if it's coming from a Unix machine. You just don't know. And so, but it's really not going to be easy to extract anything out other than the simplest of JSON statements. And so what the intent of send JSON is that is not part of the CodeSite logger class, but it's a helper function that we've added into the class that takes the data structure, parses it out, and presents it in a object inspector like grid. So what it does is, we'll come over to here. So the class itself is very simple. It's just tCodeSite JSON logger as a class helper for tCodeSite logger, which is our base logger class that's inside of CodeSite logging. We're using the DBX JSON unit to do all of the JSON parsing, and that comes with Delphi. And we then will jump down to see what that function does. So the send JSON, all it does is it creates a string list, which it needs to take the JSON value that's passed in, and it passes it along to this function called JSON to property list. And it simply does a lot of parsing to figure out, okay, what type of elements do I have here? Are the objects? Is it an array? And for each of those different elements, it tries to drill down as deep as it can and extract out the different information. At some point, you get name value pairs throughout your JSON. Now, it may be part of an array, it may be another collection of items, and so there's multiple statements that or multiple methods that are involved into this whole parsing that I'm not going to have time to cover in depth inside of this session, but since the source code's provided, you can certainly walk through and see what's done. Basically, it creates the list and then calls process pair if it finds that it's an actual JSON object. If it's an array, it has to process each element of the array, which in turn will process each pair, and so forth. And the pair may have an array element associated with it. So the whole purpose of this is to generate a new string list of data that is in the format that CodeSite can understand. And so once we get that, we use the send message details method, which is inherited by the logger, and either send it out as an object or as custom properties with our new data, which is S. So it's pretty straightforward once you get through all the JSON parsing. But the cool thing is to see what does it do. So let me give it a quick run, and I'll bring my my viewer up here, and let me go ahead and clear that, and I can I'll just put the all messages because everything will go in through there. And if I go ahead and click the button, The first line is the regular traditional CodeSite send that just sent the JSON. And as you can see, it's not super complicated or long, but it's got it has an array in there, and it's got a nested object. But if we click on sample JSON, which uses our new function, we now have it formatted into essentially a name value pair list. So we have our first name, last names, age. Address is a nested object, and so it has its name value pairs as subsets of the address node. And then phone numbers, there's an array of those based on the type of number and the actual phone number. And so we get to see both of those inside our code. Just an alternate way of seeing CodeSite data. Using a class helper, we can bolt that on top of any of our existing loggers. All we have to do is in our code, in addition to including the CodeSite logging unit, you simply need to add in the CodeSite JSON logging unit, and now you get that capability for free. So pretty cool way of managing all of that. All right. Time goes by quickly. Just my final slide or two, and we can wrap this up. We do have a special promotion going on for CodeRage 8. Can't believe we've had 8 of these. This is great. Glad to see we're still going strong. We are offering a $100 discount off of the price of CodeSite Studio. And so if you can, it's a great time to take advantage of that. If you've tried out the Express Edition and you want to move up to some of the more advanced features, now's a great time to do that. We do have discounts on upgrades to see CodeSite Studio 5. If you're using an older version, for example, maybe you've been using an older version of Delphi, now you're moving to XE5, and now you want to get up to CodeSite Studio 5, we can certainly help you with that. Discounts on our other products as well. You can find all this information at the URL listed there. And the key thing to remember is if you do want to take advantage of the special pricing is remember CodeRage 8. That's the promo code to use, and you'll get the discounted pricing when we process your order. So that's all the information I have today. I hope this a little bit different direction rather than just an overview, but some going in depth, talking about deployment, talking about strategies, some things kind of shed some light a little bit better in your CodeSite experience. I will be online once the video ends to answer any questions you might have. I thank you for taking the time to listen and hope you enjoy the rest of CodeRage. Thank you.
So there are a couple ones here you haven't answered yet. Let's see. Never tried CodeSite, but it looks very cool. Looking forward to trying it out. Okay, that's not a question. Glad you look.
Comment though.
Good comment. Yes. When multi-threading, is a single-threaded instance of tCodeSite logger safe to use from multiple threads?
Yes, it is.
Oh, type, Jim?
Oh, go ahead. You type.
I'll type. You type.
Okay. Eureka.
Yeah, one of the nice things with this and the way we design CodeSite is so that you really don't have to think about the different ways in which it's used. We want to try to manage the data. You have multiple threads in your application. You might have multiple instances of your same application, and you've got all this data, and you want to see the interactions between them. And you don't want to, start colliding your messages over one or the other. You don't want to have, you don't want all the typical synchronization problems that you run into. So now some people, that's one of the reasons why we track the process ID, app name, and thread for every message that gets sent, so that in like the example I showed, you can isolate a given thread or see the intermix of two threads and see the relationships between them. So
excellent. So he says in Eureka log, it allows you to jump to the source line causing the exception. Is there a similar feature in CodeSite?
We don't offer that, mostly because unlike the other tools like Eureka Log and some of the other exception tools that track things, where they're adding more information that's either relying on debug information, more of a stack trace, more of map files, and so forth that get included with the application code. In CodeSite, we don't require any of that. We made a decision not to require any of the extra settings, any of the extra overhead for doing that. And the downside is that you can't go from a given CodeSite message statement in the log viewer, live viewer, directly to a source code line. Now, does that mean you can't go from and find, oh, what code generated this message? Well, not necessarily, because a lot of times the content that we're showing, you've made a statement. That's why the message text is in there. That's why we also encourage the use of categories so that you know which section of code you're looking at. And going back and forth is pretty easily. Once you find out and look at your log, then going to the source code to see what generated it, it does go by pretty quickly.
Okay. What platforms does CodeSite work with? Does it work with FireMonkey, VCL, where?
So currently, right now, CodeSite will work with all the Windows platforms, so 32-bit, 64-bit, and the various frameworks that are supported on those. So including VCL and FireMonkey, and also .NET. You can also, and so including FireMonkey for Win32, Win64 platforms. One of the things we're looking at is migrating that to other platforms. Certainly at the logging level stage, we're kind of re-architecting some things to better handle the mobile space. Whether or not the tooling or some subset of tooling gets moved to the cross-platform side, that'll probably come, but the robustness of the main viewers will probably stay on the Windows platform for the time being, much like the Delphi IDE stays on Windows for the time being. And so, yeah, look over the next several months, we're going to be doing quite a bit more with the newer platforms that are all coming out.
Okay, great. Question here, how much serializing occurs within our projects when CodeSite is called? Is there more or less serializing when using multiple instances of CodeSite logger?
Is there multiple serial? So I think I understand where the question's going to, and it's not the serializing in the general sense of when you're talking about remote procedure calls and things like moving objects from one side to the other. It's not quite the same, although it does share some similarities. The only time serialization really occurs is when you're wanting to capture all the properties of an object, and it uses the runtime type information to extract that information, package it up. That's essentially your serialization from an object to a representational state, and then that gets moved across. That's not impacted by the number of loggers that are used. Each logger can handle its own serialization of the various objects that are used, so you're not bottlenecked to a given singleton that's doing all the serialization in your own applications. That's shared amongst each logger so that you're not having that bottleneck of throughput. Then now, also considering the whole serialization side, if you think of it in terms of your logging messages and how that gets streamed out correctly to the log file in its normal process, that's handled through the CodeSite dispatcher. Its sole job is to queue up the incoming messages and then serialize those out to whatever destination that it took place in. But your app doesn't have to be worried about those level of details.
Okay. So CodeSite's included with Delphi. Can you talk a little about what difference between that and the different versions of CodeSite and with which editions of Delphi?
Oh, sure. That's the main differences between CodeSite Express, which is included in Delphi and has been for several releases now, which is great. Gives people an opportunity to try out a fully functional logging system that gives you kind of the main high-level benefits of both live logging at your developer level and file-based logging that you can deploy with your solution. The main differences are in the logging capabilities. The tooling is the same. Whether using CodeSite Studio or Express, the live viewer is the same live viewer, the dispatcher is the same, but what you can log is what differs. So in the main differences in the Studio edition are, one, you get remote capabilities. So if you want to log on your local machine and send that output to a remote machine, you can do that. That's supported. You have a whole lot more data types that are supported in the Studio edition. So not just the standard data types, strings, integers, and even objects, but we extend that to include collection support. So all the objects in a collection and their subproperties. You have image support, so bitmaps, icons, screenshots. You want to take a screenshot of the desktop of your app as it's running, you can record that, which we find is very powerful when a user says, "Oh, I didn't click that button," and sure enough, the screenshot shows them clicking that button. You can do some things like that. There's a number of additional system information settings you can get to, getting access to the registry, seeing what registry entries are being set, validate that those are correct. File support, there's XML data that you can send and have an XML viewer inspect that, which is better than just seeing as straight text. So it's really the main differences is all the extra things you can do. One of the cool things that I've done in previous code rages is I talk about an event called the onSend message event, and that's also in the Studio edition. And what that gives you is a way to hook into the sending process of your logger. And we find we provide it basically as a tool for people to do extra things with it. They can do their own monitoring, for example, that if a CodeSite logger logs an error message, they may want to send out an email alert to somebody. And so their application code can check to see if an error message is being sent, and then if they want to handle it directly, they can. If not, they let CodeSite go ahead and take care of it. But it gives them a lot of flexibility in what they can do with it. And thanks for jumping to our website that shows the different editions there. That's actually a detailed list of the various types of data that's in there, and that really covers most of the pieces that are in there. The Scratchpad's another entry that I didn't show an example this time, but there's previous videos that certainly you can look up. The Scratchpad's very cool. It's one of those underutilized pieces of the tool. A lot of times we want to see what's going on in our application, but we don't want to necessarily fill up our log with that data. And the classic example is mouse moves. When you're doing things with components and testing, hit testing, sending out the XY coordinates of the mouse and whether or not it's in the rectangle really doesn't make sense to fill up your log with lots of these various events. The only one you're really interested in is the most recent set. And writing those to the Scratchpad allow you to do that, to see how things are moving without interrupting your flow, and that's really key for this. CodeSite was created originally to support the development of our Raize components product. And so we did a lot of the work, having things running inside of Delphi, making sure that all the manipulation of things at design time and runtime were all working correctly at that component level. So that's where some of this history comes from.
Is it possible to have the same functionality for logging database apps as the T monitor does, the monitoring from FireDAC provides?
Yes is the short answer to that. It's not currently available at the moment, but that is definitely once we've got the FireDAC components, that we're actually just been investigating that very thing. Was some of the same logging capabilities that we did with the DB Express stuff, doing the same kind of thing for sending that data over to CodeSite? Absolutely.
Okay.
But
one of the things we like,
right? You could write some code that would pull out fields or property values or whatever from any component, right?
Oh, absolutely, exactly. I mean, right now, the codes, one of the ththings that should be listed, there's the DB tools that's also included in CodeSite Studio, and that is to be able to send over a data set or a data set record. And all we require is the standard interface to those. And so it uses the field objects to get at that data and then gives you a snapshot of what that looks like into your CodeSite log. What we like to and then going further with like the monitoring side and the tracing capabilities that the database access layers have, hooking into those and having them go to CodeSite's a great idea because you have this dedicated log, you have all the information now in one spot, plus the tooling to analyze it. One of the things I like to describe is people's like, oh, can I send something? And I usually always say yes. If you can get to the data, we have a variety of ways to get that data into CodeSite that works well with the rest of the interface. So if you want to have a custom data structure that is, it's just your own making, and maybe it doesn't have any private or doesn't have any published data, there's no RTTI, it's based on nested record structures, you can create a formatter in CodeSite to allow you to send that data over and view it just like a regular message type inside of CodeSite.
Okay. So John says that when he mentioned serialization before, he talked about synchronization. It was meant synchronization, which I think is what you addressed. And then another question from Alf says, how to inform users about what you are logging. I guess privacy concerns with me is where he's coming from there.
I think so. I mean, maybe the person who asked the question can expound a little bit more of what their concern is from that.
If they deploy an application with logging in it,
yes,
they should tell their users that, hey, I'm collecting data on some stuff about the application you're using.
We leave that to the discretion of the developer that's writing the application using the tool. So whether they could be just doing diagnostic information of their application, obviously if they're recording, personal identification information and then sending out that log file, they're going to want to do some, notification, let them know that they're doing that. But most of the time people are just recording, what's going on with the application and not so much with the actual data pieces.
CodeSite examples. Where are the CodeSite examples in XE5?
So there's no dedicated CodeSite examples of that we deploy other than the message generator, which is available on our website. And but the best place to look is in the CodeSite help. There's a getting started section that has several different languages, including Delphi and C++ Builder. And so that is the best way to walk through and get started with using them and then build onto that. The message generator is the second one that has demonstrations of almost all the different messages that can be sent. The easiest thing, though, really is to just add the CodeSite logging unit to your users clause. If you're using C++ Builder, you need to do a pragma comment and a pragma link. But those are outlined in the help to step you through that. Once you do that, you can go ahead and just type CodeSite dot or CodeSite arrow and try sending some messages out. It's actually, it sounds kind of simple, but it's the easiest way to get started. Sending out CodeSite data is just to get started working with that. But of course, if there's a specific question anybody has, support@raize.com is a great way to get that. We also have web forums dedicated to CodeSite as well.
John says, again, with the synchronization question, he says, because of synchronization, messages arrive in the log in a different order than they were sent. I'd like the ability to sort the log view, particularly by timestamp.
That's interesting because every message is time-stamped in their generation, not at their destination.
I think he's saying that they're time-stamped at generation, but then they don't arrive in the same order at the destination because of synchronization.
That is certainly possible, but if that is the case, then they're coming from different threads. And that's interesting.
Yes.
They would come from different threads. So my first suggestion would be to actually isolate the threads that he's interested in viewing. And then if he needs to reorder them, he can actually contact us, and we're actually working on it. We have a tool that's kind of under development to do some of that very thing. We can continue that discussion further, but for the most part, creating a separate view to isolate the thread that he's looking at is going to give him the information that he needs.
Okay. Is it simple to configure the reports so that a final version does not expose the logging while debug versions used by beta testers do so?
Well, okay, so there's a simple answer, and then I'm not quite sure if he's asking for more than what I think it is. The easiest way to configure CodeSite when you're going to deployment, if you do not need the logging capabilities when you go to deploy your system, you can turn off the enabled property for the CodeSite manager. And when that is turned off, then no CodeSite logger instances will generate their data. Furthermore, if you deploy an application that uses CodeSite, that sends a message, but you don't have the CodeSite tools installed on that system, then CodeSite, when it first tries to send a message, will look for the tools to see if they're running. If they're not, it will try to start them, but because they're not installed, it will disable itself. So the easiest thing to do is you can turn it off ahead of time if you know that, and by turning it off, you can have an option in your XML config file, the registry, an INI file, some way to control that, and then, or even a command line parameter for that matter. And if they're not present, you just turn the CodeSite Manager enabled property to false, and you'll have no logging. And this allows you to, you can turn that on dynamically, just reset the CodeSite Manager enabled flag, and then the logging messages will start up again.
Okay, this is going to be our last question. Actually, if it's quick, it's time to go on to the next one. Is it possible to have info display in the view from a server in the same or different domain?
Yes, but you need to use the TCP sending capability. So there's a connect using TCP method of the logger. It's described in the advanced techniques of the CodeSite help. So that if you want to log, say, from a service, that's what you have to do, because the viewers and the tools are in the user's desktop, which is not in the same domain or window station as the service. So doing it in your REST servers or your ISAPI DLLs and your services, you need to use the TCP transport mechanism.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Ray. We're going to have you back in, looks like, an hour right after Robert's session. So
exactly, and I'll continue answering any questions that weren't answered for the next several minutes.